Hello everyone, back tuning into today's video. We're going to have a look at the weather next 8 to 10 days in today's video. We'll also have a look at the sea surface temperature numbers in the Atlantic, because the Atlantic is in really quite a cold state at the moment. Remember we talked a lot about the cold blob last summer, and it probably did have some impact. I think the influence of it was overstated, but it probably did have some impact on the cool summer that we had last year. Winds were very westerly and coming over cooler than average sea surface temperatures, and no doubt those westerlies were a bit cooler than they would otherwise have been. And that cold area in the North Atlantic Ocean, or colder than average area in the North Atlantic Ocean, has continued through the winter, and it's still there. So I'll show you the charts in a second on that. And as I say, we'll have a look at weather the next 8-10 days as well. Yesterday there was a suggestion we might get the winds going into the east, pulling in really quite a cold easy wind. There's a lot of uncertainty about that at the moment. It's not totally off the table, but it could be that high pressure will just stick over the country, keeping us mostly settled and keeping that cold air at bay to the east. But I'll show you the detail on that as well in a second. Before I get on with all of that though, just to say about the ads, there's links to articles on all the pages. Have a browse widgets and click through the links if there's any articles that you're interested in. Thanks so much for doing that. It does help to pay for our website. It allows us to stay completely free of charge, so we don't have to think about subscriptions or anything like that. Thanks so much for doing that. So let's just start off with sea surface temperature anomalies. Interested in the Atlantic this time. Normally with these charts we look at the Pacific and see what's going on with El Nino, but this is the area we're interested in, our side of the Earth and the Atlantic Ocean. This was sea surface temperature anomaly on the 17th of August 2015, so back in last summer, and that was the cold blob that we heard so much about in the Atlantic Ocean last summer. There was some speculation that that was to do with the Gulf Stream switching off and that kind of thing. It's nothing of the sort. It's just really a cyclical change from the Atlantic. It's the cold Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation beginning to show its hands. I don't think we're definitively, even now, I don't think we're definitively going into the cold Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. I think we've got another 5, maybe 10 years before we go definitively into that cold phase of the Atlantic Ocean. But we've been in the warm phase of the AMO since around 1995, and I think we're just beginning to see the signs that the Atlantic is starting to move. I would expect the Atlantic is actually going to warm again over the next 2 or 3 years from where we are now. I'll show you where we are now in a second. I think the Atlantic will warm one final time over the next 2 or 3 years, but this is telling us where the Atlantic is going long term, and we have got to think about going into this cold AMO definitively within the next 5 to 10 years or so. So that was the situation back in the summer, and as I say, the winds were very westerly last summer, so I think that did have some impact in giving us a coolish summer. You remember September was the coolest since around 1993 or 1994, a very long time ago, that we had such a cool September, and that was back when we had a cold Atlantic as well. We was in the cold AMO as well back in the early 1990s. So I think it did have an impact on giving us quite a cool summer and September last year. This is the current situation in terms of the Atlantic, and you can see that that cold anomaly is still there. In fact, it's spread out. It's now looking very, very cold, colder than average anyway, in terms of those sea surface temperature anomalies. On our side of the Atlantic Ocean, you notice that it has warmed a bit over towards the American side of the Atlantic, and it is warming down towards the tropical Atlantic as well. That's interesting, because if we get La Nina setting up in the Pacific this summer, if it's going to be warm in the tropics, then that implies we could have a much bigger hurricane season in the Atlantic this year. So we've got to keep an eye on this warming that's going on just here. But in terms of our part of the Atlantic, it's looking very cool indeed. So whilst we have had a mild winter, because the westerlies have ruled this winter, and even though the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic are cooler than average, it still isn't enough to stop us from having a very mild winter. It will only take a couple of degrees off the temperature, and of course westerlies, southwesterlies in the winter are going to be very mild for our location of the world anyway. But when we get to summer, this has a much bigger impact. So if these cold sea surface temperature anomalies continue into the summer, and we continue to have westerly winds through the summer, I would expect another fairly coolish summer. But keep in mind that the Atlantic is warming now. Over towards the American side, it's warming down towards the tropics. So whether this cold area, whether its days are a bit numbered, they could well be, and I wouldn't be surprised, as I say, over the next year or two, actually, I think we'll probably shift towards a warmer Atlantic again. But what's gone on over the past couple of years with these cold sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic is that it's telling us where the AMO is going long term. And long term, over the 5 to 10 year period, long term, we're going to definitively drop into a cold Atlantic Ocean during the next decade or so. And I think this has been the first hints of that. But in the shorter term, just in the next year or two, we might well find the Atlantic warming up. The beginnings of that could be happening already down in the tropics and over towards America. I think I'll probably do an update at some point in the near future, talking much more about the AMO, what it is, and where it's going, because I haven't really got time for this video. So I've just give a quick heads up on how the Atlantic is looking. Right, Central England temperature, we've gone colder than average with the CET. Look at this, March is currently provisionally standing at 4.2, an anomaly of 0.7 degrees below average. This is the coldest anomaly and the coldest provisional CET that we have seen at any point this winter. So we've got into spring, we are into the start of mid-tropical spring, and we're colder than any point during the winter of 2015-2016. You couldn't make it up, could you? But there we go. It just goes to show that after a mild winter, things can turn around when we get into the spring. And as I say, it's pretty chilly in the CET region at the moment. So these are the GFS temperature and precipitation ensembles for the next couple of weeks. A red line 30-year temperature average. We're losing this cold weather that we've had over the past few days. We're going back much closer to average, and that takes us into weekend. Notice this big precipitation spike as well. A lot of wet weather coming up tonight across central parts of England. If I have time, I might just quickly drop into the website Weather Online, just show you the charts for that at the end of the video. But a big rainfall situation coming up tonight down in the south. But anyway, temperatures are lifting up now, so we're going to be a bit milder for the rest of this week. Into the weekend, we get a burst of spring. There we go. See the temperatures lifting up over the red line, over 30-year temperature average. I think we'll see temperatures up into mid-teens Celsius by the time we get through to Sunday. Now after that, we've got a huge amount of scatter. Look at all these different coloured lines, and some of them going for significantly milder than average weather through the course of next week. Some of them going really very cold. So yesterday I spoke about the chance of much colder weather, winter, blasting back in from the east next week. It's not off the table. Whilst we've got so many members of the GFS ensemble going for really very cold conditions, we have to take it seriously. But bear in mind, there is so much scatter here in this ensemble. There's something like a 20, from around the 15th, which is a week today, there's something like a 20-degree differential between the warmest and coldest members of the ensemble. Maybe a little bit more than that, maybe up to 25 degrees difference between the warmest and coldest members. Remember, these are upper air temperatures, but that's still a very significant difference indeed. And basically, when you get that much scatter within the GFS ensembles, you just can't really predict what's going to happen. Anything could happen next week. It's possible that high pressure just stick over the country and keep the coldest of the air at bay to the east, but can't rule out the chance of something significantly colder. So here's the generic chart. This is for GFS for Saturday. High pressure ridging in. Going to be a nice weekend. This high pressure takes over 3 weekends, so expect increasing amounts of sunshine. Temperatures lifting up by day, could reach 15 degrees, 59 Fahrenheit in the sunshine in the south, but the offset of that is that it could be fairly cold still at night if the skies are clear. Expect an ongoing risk of frost. As we get through to next week, this is Monday, you see the high pressure is trying to ridge up towards Scandinavia, so this is trying to set up that east. And in fact, down in the south on Tuesday, 15th, we do bring in a bit of an easterly there, but it's not particularly cold. The coldest of the air is actually in the east and the southeast of Europe with that. And then the high pressure sticks with us through the course of next week, generally centred to the north. So it's not going to be a heat wave, but whenever you have high pressure to the north, the winds and the flow is generally going to be from the north or the east. So it won't be a heat wave, but we are keeping the coldest of the air at bay. We can see this on the upper air temperatures, that the coldest of the air is across Scandinavia and eastern parts of Europe. We're still relatively mild with the upper air temperatures anyway. So just largely dry through the course of next week. Well, I think temperatures, they're a bit hit and miss, really. Probably cooling off as that east wind picks up, but not especially cold on this particular run of the GFS. The ECWF, again, high pressure building in through the early part of the weekend. That high pressure takes over and stays with us into next week as well. We do pick up a bit of an easterly down in the south, which will be caught and probably drag in a lot of cloud. So we'll lose the spring-like weather, I think, early next week, but we're going to have over the weekend. I don't think that's going to last too long. But I don't think we're going to go back definitively to winter on the basis of these charts anyway, because the high pressure is just sticking around the UK. Really, it needs to go up and become centred somewhere around here or here to properly start bringing the winds in from the east and tapping in to this cold pool that's sitting up to the northeast. It's not doing that on these charts, but as we saw on the ensemble, GFS ensembles, several members of the GFS ensemble are doing that and going for that kind of very cold scenario, so we can't rule out the chance of something like that coming off. But a lot of dry weather, I will think, through the course of next week. Temperatures still to be determined. Let's just have a quick look at the website Weather Online so we can see the situation for tonight, and we'll have a look at the expert charts over there. So we're going to start off at 6 o'clock in the morning. Notice a lot of very heavy rain there across England and Wales, really wet at 6 o'clock in the morning. Risk of some snow across northern England and central Scotland, maybe the Welsh mountains could be included in that as well. And that rain goes on throughout the morning. This is the high resolution Euro 4 model, and it keeps that wet weather going on all morning across much of England and Wales. So the rainfall total is really crocking up tomorrow morning, and even into 6 o'clock in the evening we've got quite a bit of rain still there across northern England down into the Midlands, central, southern parts of England. The precipitation accumulation at that point looks pretty high for England and Wales, so quite widely we're up to around 20-25 millimetres, an inch of rain. This central sway probably can't make it out all that well, but through the Midlands we're going up over 40 millimetres of rain with the Euro 4 model prediction by the end of tomorrow. That's getting on for a couple of inches of rain. Obviously it could produce some local flooding and well, wettest spell that we've had for quite some time, I think, down in the south by the end of tonight and into tomorrow. Right, bit of an eclectic mishmash of stuff today. Hope you found it interesting. The bottom line for the next week to 10 days is that high pressure will be building in. We'll get a burst of spring over the weekend. I would expect it to cool down early next week. We may not go to this wintry blast that we looked like we were going to have yesterday. There's a lot of uncertainty about that. But I expect a lot of dry weather next week. Temperatures to be determined, but I will think cooling off after a spring-like spell early next week. Right, that's all for now. 5-day forecast. Where I come back that. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.